This is part 4 of The Spirit Dancer, Tessa Lamar novels, Book 5. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Holly Adams. Be sure to subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find more of Kathryn's paranormal and contemporary romance novels.
Chapter 33. The tribal house was fairly large. It contained a dozen dorm rooms, offices, and a massive reception hall. Outside was a sizable pavilion and an open area with a fire pit where the elders conducted sacred ceremonies. Normally, there was ample enough parking for a couple of hundred guests, yet cars filled every square inch of the parking lot and overflowed onto both sides of the road. I'd never seen the place so crowded. I leaned forward to get a better look at a white convertible Mercedes. I have a bad feeling about this. Bryson reached back and took my hand. Darlene either hadn't heard me, or she'd chosen to ignore my concern. I knew we were going to be late. Aaron hitched a shoulder.
It's not like they can start without us.
Being new parents is no excuse to keep everyone waiting. She mimicked Grandma's voice again. Good one, Aunt Darlene, TJ giggled. She turned and shook her finger in his face. Watch your sass, young man. Mama, stop it. I wasn't sure if she thought she was being funny or was taking her self-assigned authority too seriously. Either way, the constant reminders that my great-grandmother wasn't there hurt. Aaron met my gaze in the rear view and furrowed his brow. It seemed I wasn't the only one she was irritating. Looks like everyone beat us here. We need to get inside. The moment the vehicle came to a stop, Darlene hopped out. I followed her, handed Bryson the baby, and moved the seat to allow TJ and JoJo to exit the back row. Buck Oldham joined us beside the SUV. The older Cherokee wore his ceremonial robes, and for a brief moment, all I saw was my grandfather. The men had the same coloring and height. Special days, family gatherings, and holidays were the absolute worst reminders that he was gone. Until then, the only way I'd managed to survive them was Grandma's constant presence. I couldn't imagine my life without her. Wouldn't imagine it. Buck's gruff voice pulled me back to the matter at hand.
We'll start as soon as everyone is seated. You have quite the unusual crowd.
I opened my mouth to ask about said crowd, but Darlene cut me off. Honestly, Tessa, get a move on. We have a ton of people waiting for the ceremony to end so they can eat. Glad to know they're only here for the food. I narrowed my eyes. She huffed and hurried TJ and JoJo inside. Aaron joined me.
What's up with her?
No idea. But if I had to guess, I'd say she invited all 407 cousins.
I'll go see who's in there.
Bryson looped his free arm with mine and guided me to the entrance. He'd drawn his magic to the surface and then some. It spilled out of him and engulfed me in its warm embrace. Something was wrong. More wrong than Darlene inviting every cousin on the planet. The second I lowered my shields, an unfamiliar magic hit me. It was strong, like walking into someone's secondhand smoke, only less smelly. Is that?
Faye.
He ground out the word. Darlene did this. My already frazzled nerves frayed into millions of tiny pieces. I would have marched in there and given her a piece of my mind, but what was the point? I couldn't put the milk back into the glass. Bryson nodded.
When this is over, we're going to set some boundaries with that woman. She's crossed the line one too many times.
I didn't envy Darlene. Walking through the door, I whispered, they could be here to see Quinn. Killian said Faye babies are rare.
Maybe.
He stopped long enough to meet my gaze.
It's more than likely another test.
The entire situation made me queasy. Let's call it off and go home.
It's not that simple. Every medicine man on the East Coast is here to honor Chesequa's great-grandson.
Bryson sighed like a man choosing pistols or blades at dawn. I didn't want to duel at all. I wanted to wave the white flag and get the heck out of there. I don't give a damn about them. Our kids are here.
I doubt anything will happen until after the ceremony.
And if it does? My voice came out on the wrong side of hysterical. Bryson lifted my chin and stared into my eyes.
Stay between Aaron and me. As soon as it's over, we'll slip out the back door.
I nodded, but I didn't like it. Harris, the root doctor who'd helped us with the boo hag and taught Aaron to control his magic, strode toward us.
Had I known what sort of trouble was brewing, I would have hung around a little longer.
Bryson shook Harris's hand.
Had we known, we might have gone to Georgia with you.
The root doctor turned to me.
The skies are dark now, but the sun will return sooner than you think.
I didn't have it in me to fake optimism. If you say so.
I'm here to help when you need me.
Harris winked and walked back outside. I prayed he meant it. More so, I prayed he wouldn't vanish on me like Charlie and Gavin had. We walked inside Buck's office and found him standing with a handful of tribal elders. The men had their heads together, but stopped talking when Bryson and I approached. No one smiled or acknowledged our presence. Aaron came in a few seconds after us. He glanced around and ran his hand down his face.
There are at least 24 people from the O'Rourke side of the family out there.
I wouldn't have thought it possible, but the elder's faces hardened even more.
They are not people.
Buck spoke with such hatred, I turned my upper body from him to shield Quinn.
Some of them are family.
Aaron took a step away from him.
I don't care what they are or who they're related to. Those things are not welcome here.
His tone caused a familiar pit to form in my stomach. The same black hole of rage that opened every time someone told a Native American joke or treated the brown-skinned members of my family different. Aaron squared his shoulders.
And why exactly is that?
Buck rounded on him.
A member of this tribe was murdered on this land by a magic user.
I stepped closer to Buck and the other elders. I apologize. We had no idea they were going to show up here today, but that doesn't excuse bigotry. Ignoring me altogether, he glared at Bryson.
I ordered you to tell me if anything else happened with the Fae.
Bryson said,
I don't take orders. You are here on this land because I invited you to help Chesequa's granddaughter learn to control her magic.
His expression told me exactly what he thought of the job Bryson had done. Bryson balled his hands and took a step forward, but stopped, drew a deep breath, and exhaled slowly.
We suspect the Fae had something to do with the animal attacks, but have good reason to believe Wyatt and the others are alive.
One of the elders in the room gasped. The other glared. Buck turned an unhealthy shade of red.
What makes you think that?
Bryson didn't as much as flinch at the shouting.
As you well know, Tessa is able to speak to spirits.
Buck scoffed.
Why would anyone go to such lengths to create an elaborate scene and not commit murder?
The way he'd arranged his words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold Fae magic in the air. It sounded as though he'd spoken from personal experience. Aaron eased to my side and rested his hand on the small of my back.
We believe someone is testing Tessa or trying to force her to break Fae law.
Brassen glanced at me before turning back to Buck.
The fact that there are so many Fae here today could mean they have something planned.
Buck looked me over as if weighing my worth. Judging by his sneer, I'd come up wanting. Bryson made a growly sound in the back of his throat.
We're calling the ceremony off.
Buck scoffed.
Like hell. My people may be simple humans, but many of them are skilled in magic. No one's going to cause problems on my watch.
Aaron's voice brought me back to the moment.
Just the same, I'd rather avoid a confrontation.
A knock on the door stopped the conversation.
Come in.
Buck glanced from Aaron to me. The mean little glint in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. Holden McAllister walked in. The boy took one look at Aaron and paled.
The cook sent me to tell you, the food is ready.
Thank you, Holden.
Buck motioned to us.
You know Jolene's parents from church. Why don't you say hello?
He licked his lips several times and shifted his weight from one foot to the other as if debating making a break for it.
Hi.
Buck and the elders had watched our every move. I stood and gave Holden a quick hug. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're okay.
Good to see you, too. Glad you're okay, too.
He hurried for the door. Bryson and Aaron seemed to hold their breaths until the teen left the room. One of the elders stepped forward. The guy was human, but magic coiled around him like a rattlesnake ready to strike.
We should give them time to discuss what they wish to do about the naming ceremony in private.
I had a feeling what he really meant was he had something to say that he didn't want us to hear. Buck nodded and followed the others out of the room. Bryson blew out a breath and glanced between us.
That was unexpected.
Aaron frowned.
Was that a test? I believe so. They likely wanted to see how we would react to Holden being here.
Bryson stood and paced. Aaron winced.
Why is he here? A dozen or so shifters live in the dorms. They're keeping an eye on him until he learns to control his beast.
Bryson closed his eyes and rubbed his brow.
I think we handled that okay, but we can't let our guards down.
I'd had it up to my eyeballs with people testing us. All the more reason for us to call the ceremony off and go home. Bryson sighed.
I understand you two want to leave, but I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Aaron motioned for him to continue. Me? I stood there dumbstruck by seeing Holden, the Fae outside, and Buck's racist behavior. By all accounts, Buck had loved Charlie, but he'd given me more than my fair share of grief since learning I was a Nunnehi. Heck, at one point, he'd tried to have another medicine man bind my magic. It wasn't until we'd reached an agreement on how Bryson and I would function in the tribe that he'd backed off. Or so I thought.
We know we're in danger, but we don't know enough about it to protect ourselves or the kids.
Bryson glanced away and swallowed hard. Which is why we should go. For the life of me, I didn't understand why he was so hell-bent on going through with the ceremony. Bryson wouldn't look at either of us.
Once Quinn is a member of the tribe and of Tessa's clan, he will have the sworn protection of every medicine man and woman out there. So?
Aaron pointed at me.
Tessa has all of that so-called protection, and it hasn't helped her.
I shook my head. No, Bryson's right. He and I aren't technically part of the tribe. We renounced our status when we stopped them from executing you. Aaron threw his hands up.
And these are the people you want our son involved with?
Bryson closed the distance between us and placed both his hands on Aaron's shoulders.
Buck and the elders, no. People like Hearst? Yes. Short of allowing Killian to take him to Tirnanok, The human magic users are the only ones who could protect him. If we're dead,
Aaron pulled away from him and cursed under his breath.
let's get the blessing and get the hell out of here.
I raised my hand like a schoolchild. Do I get a vote in this? Before they could respond, Buck Oldham came back into the office and smiled. Not a mean smile or even a forced one. He seemed like a different man than the racist a-hole that had walked out.
What did you decide?
The guys turned to me, but I was still trying to decide if Buck was a sociopath or one hell of an actor.
Tessa,
Bryson raised a brow. Majority rules. I held Quinn tighter. Bryson nodded toward me and the baby.
I'm taking Tessa and this little guy home as soon as the ceremony is over.
I understand.
Buck stared at the baby. The conversation had left me exhausted. All I wanted to do was go home. If we're going to do this, let's do it now.
I agree.
Buck walked to me and traced a line from Quinn's forehead to the tip of his tiny nose.
You're one handsome boy.
Quinn's eyes widened and he cooed. Buck chuckled.
I understand May gifted him with his English name.
Yes, we call him Quinn.
Bryson stood taller.
His tribal name is not yet known, but I suspect Chesequa will gift it when the time is right.
Once again, emotion clogged my throat. Charlie had taken the traditions of his people very seriously, and so did Bryson. Potentially, Quinn would have many tribal names over the course of his life. The first would be a gift from a medicine man or his grandfather's spirit. The others would come as a result of his accomplishments.
Very well.
Buck took a step back.
Normally, I'd ask the three of you to take the child to the water for cleansing before the ceremony, but today is not normal.
Bryson and Aaron nodded, but I was still stuck on the idea of calling it off. Quinn let out a peal of laughter. I'm talking a full-on squealed baby giggle.
I guess he didn't want a bath in the river.
Aaron laughed along with the little guy. Bryson and I exchanged worried glances. Chapter 34. Aaron, Bryson, and I followed Buck out the double doors that led to the ceremonial gathering place. The second my eyes adjusted to the sunlight, my stomach fell to the floor and tried to crawl away. We had a crowd, all right. A crowd whose collective energy threatened to choke off the oxygen to the ceremonial fire. Humans on the right, Fae on the left, both sides armed with magic. I felt like the bride at a Hatfield and McCoy wedding. Sandwiched between Aaron and Bryson, I made my way down the long path toward the redwood altar. My men seemed almost as tense as I was, but the baby hadn't stopped squealing and giggling since we'd stepped outside. I brought Quinn to my shoulder and kept my eyes straight ahead, or tried to. The Fae in attendance were hard to ignore. Each was more beautiful than the last. The tension in my shoulders seeped away with each step. I highly doubted any of the Fae were there to hurt us. Then it hit me. I'd experienced the same sensation at Graham May's when I'd gotten in the way of Teague's magic. They're projecting calm. But why? I turned to tell Bryson, but stopped when I caught sight of Killian. My brother met my gaze and frowned. Hard. I thought he was upset with me, until he gave the woman standing beside him side-eye and shook his head a fraction of an inch. I glanced at the female. She looked a lot like the woman who'd accompanied Killian to church, but that woman had been pretty. The woman watching my son was... what? A single word lodged in my brain. Regal. I didn't need introductions to know I was staring at Creva, Queen of the East She. Everything about the raven-haired woman was classy, from her perfectly arranged curls to the tailored fit of her black silk pantsuit. Quinn turned his head toward her and lifted his entire upper body. I'd been so distracted by the Queen I almost lost my grip on him. The rush of adrenaline at nearly dropping my child in front of an audience left my heart racing. Bryson stopped walking and whispered,
Everything okay?
I'm not sure. I smiled, although it probably looked more manic than reassuring. The magic in the air, it has a calming effect.
Not on me.
He half whispered and half growled. I wasn't sure he was right. Any other time, Bryson would have whisked us away at the first whiff of trouble, but he'd marched us into the middle of it. By the time we laid Quinn on the redwood altar, Buck looked like he could spit fire. I took Bryson's hand and wished I hadn't. The man was a ball of magic and tension. He gave me a tight smile without taking his eyes off the baby. Maybe the fey magic wasn't working on him as much as I thought.
Quinn, great-grandson of Chesequa.
Buck dipped his finger in a fragrant mixture of green goo and smeared the mess on the baby's tummy.
I see you, and welcome you among my people.
A few of the elders behind him muttered in disbelief, but the others looked on with hard expressions. I'd been to enough of these ceremonies to know Buck hadn't followed the script, but not enough to understand all of the implications. Bryson's entire body went rigid.
Not into the tribe?
No.
He raised his chin. The blood whooshed behind my ears. Buck had marked our child an outsider, welcome on these lands as a guest, not as a member. He'd insulted us, but more shocking, he'd insulted Charlie's memory. Bryson rested his hand on Quinn's chest. Likely perceiving a threat, Aaron moved closer to me. Buck raised his chin.
Who of the Red Paint clan will speak for this child?
A soft murmur ran through the crowd. My human family likely had no idea Buck had put us in an untenable situation. I doubted the Fae recognized the significance of what was happening, but the members of the tribe most certainly did. If no one spoke for Quinn, he would have no clan, no protection, and could never follow in Charlie's footsteps and serve as a medicine man. Seconds ticked by, and no one came forward. A male voice, with a heavy brogue, rose up over the whispering crowd.
I will.
I turned and watched the dark-haired man who'd come to church with Killian step away from Queefa. He gave me a quick smile and strode to the front of the gathering like he'd done it 1,000 times. Buck looked like he'd swallowed a wasp.
You have no standing here. Since when?
The other man's eyes twinkled with mischief.
It's been nearly 3 decades since I was here last, but surely you know who I am.
Aaron's brows rose as he glanced between me and the guy. Having no clue who he was or what he had to do with Charlie's clan, I shrugged. Bryson looked the man over from head to toe and shot me a surprised glance.
I know who you are. You and your kind are not welcome on these lands.
Buck Oldham slammed his ceremonial staff on the ground hard enough it scared Quinn. Bryson lifted the baby into his arms. The proclamation caused tribe members and Fae alike to speak out of turn. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew one thing. It was time to get the heck out of there. The man shook his head at Buck.
Chesequa would be appalled that you have abandoned sacred traditions. First you deny his great-grandson a place in your tribe. Then you refuse to allow the eldest member of the Red Paint clan to bless him.
Bryson handed the baby to me, but otherwise remained in place. Cradling Quinn to my chest, I swiveled my head back and forth between them like a spectator at Wimbledon. I'd met several members of my clan over the years, and none of them looked like him. Besides my deceased mother, I was the only pale-skinned member. Rage contorted Buck's face.
You will leave these lands.
Several of the visiting medicine men and women moved between Buck and the dark-haired man. Human magic pressed against us from one side, Faye from the other. Aaron's hand went to his side as if to grab his weapon. Unfortunately for us, he'd left it at home in the safe.
I am Liam, son-in-law of Chesikwa, husband to Achila.
He met my gaze.
Father to the Firebird and grandfather of Quinn. I am the eldest surviving member of the Red Paint clan. I have every right to be here, and it is my duty to bless that child with his birthright.
My entire world tilted. Had it not been for Aaron at my side, I would have toppled over. Forgetting Buck and the elders and my stunned family members, I took a shaky step toward the man I'd waited my entire life to meet. Dad? His brow wrinkled and his eyes glistened. He glanced away and wiped his cheeks before staring at me again. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but instead, he nodded and gave me a lopsided smile. There was no self-help book to prepare someone to meet their parent for the first time as an adult. I didn't know what to say, or do, or think. My heart lurched, as if it wanted to get to him before the rest of me. Liam closed the distance and wrapped me in his arms. Kissing first my cheek, then Quinn's head, he wept into my hair.
It's you. I can't believe it's you.
Chapter 35. Liam pulled back, glanced around, and hugged me again. This time he put his lips close to my ear and exhaled.
Whatever happens today, no magic.
Darlene tugged on my sleeve. Tessa, we should go. I glanced from her to the commotion going on around us. Buck's people were shouting at the Fae. The Fae were doing their best to ignore them, but the magic in the air had taken on an oppressive quality that left me breathless. She was right. The crap was about to hit the industrial-sized fin, and no one was getting out clean. Aaron hurried to my side and offered Liam his hand.
I'm Aaron, Tessa's husband. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir, but I need to get my family out of here.
My father's expression softened.
I would expect nothing less.
Aaron wrapped his arm around my mother.
Let's get you and Quinn to the SUV.
He spoke in a calm tone, but the wrinkles around his eyes told me he was worried. I glanced around for my other hubby. Where's Bryson?
He's looking for Jolene and TJ.
What do you mean, looking for them? Since learning about my father, I'd dreamed of the day I could introduce him to my family. I'd never imagined it would be in the middle of a nightmare. Aaron lowered his voice.
We're not sure.
They were right there. Darlene turned and pointed to 2 empty chairs. Patting Quinn's bottom, I scanned the crowd for the kids. They're probably hiding under the dessert table eating brownies. Please, God, let them be stealing sweets. Quiva joined us. Trailing her hand down my father's arm, she said,
Liam, we must be off.
Of course.
He didn't pull away from her. If anything, he leaned into her touch.
Tessa, it was an absolute pleasure to meet you. I hope we can see each other again under less stressful circumstances.
I blinked to restart my brain. You're leaving? Quiva dipped her chin and gave me a shy smile.
We couldn't miss the chance to see the child again, but this is our honeymoon.
Honeymoon? I dropped my gaze to her hand on his arm and his hand on her hip. My stomach wrung like a wet dish towel, and the contents threatened to spill out my mouth.
We were married a few days ago.
The Queen reached for Quinn's hand, but I twisted away from her. Married? What the heck? What happened to 100 years of Fae slave?
It was a private ceremony.
Liam smiled, but something told me he didn't mean it.
But we are planning a larger celebration in a few weeks.
I'd be honored if you and your family were there." "Of course she will be there." Laughing softly, Quiva patted his chest. "You're welcome to visit us in Tiernan Oak any time. Lucky for you, your brother is an air elemental and can see you safely through the portal." The way she'd spoken about his powers made me wonder if he'd kept quiet about mine. "Thank you, but I'd rather y'all visit us here. From what I've heard, Tiernan Oak isn't my cup of tea." I plastered on a wide smile. I've never been much of a fan of slavery or gambling. Quiva released my father, squared her shoulders, and raised her chin. "How dare you!" Liam ran his hand over the back of his neck and looked away, but not before I caught the gleam in his eye. I didn't know him well enough to know for sure, but it looked a lot like pride. The Queen said something to me, but her sticky, sweet voice was swallowed up by the noise around us. I didn't bother to ask her to repeat it. Sensing rather than seeing Bryson's approach, I scanned the tree line. One glance at his grief-stricken face and I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. Bryson met my gaze, lifted JoJo's little pink purse, and shook his head. "Aaron!" I reached for him without taking my eyes off Bryson.
"I see him."
He angled Darlene away from the forest.
"Let's get you out of here."
For once in her life, she did as she was told without questions or arguments. "Wait, take Quinn with you." I handed him our son. "Don't let him out of your sight, and for the love of everything good and holy, don't let anyone touch him."
"I'm not leaving."
Aaron juggled the baby, but eventually got him settled on his shoulder.
"I'll have Darlene take him home."
I didn't have time to argue. He was a smart guy, a homicide detective. He had to realize we were in too much danger to send our child off with Darlene. I pressed my hand to his cheek and turned his face toward mine. "I'll find the kids, but I need to know Quinn is safe. Now go. Please."
"She's my daughter."
"She's our daughter. I swear to you we'll do whatever it takes to bring her home." He nodded, but the hard look he gave me told me he'd have quite a bit to say about it later. I turned back to where my father and the Queen had stood moments before, but they were gone. Freaking great. What good was having a bunch of Fae in the family if they didn't stick around long enough to help? Bryson surprised me by pulling me into his arms. Like Liam had done before, he used the embrace to whisper into my ear.
"I found JoJo's purse near the river."
He pressed something against my belly. I glanced down, and my world screeched to a halt. "Is that blood?" He nodded. "This can't be happening." I sagged against him for a split second before pulling myself together. There'd be time enough to fall apart once everyone was safe.
"Did Aaron get Quinn and Darlene out of here?"
Bryson glanced over the thinning crowd. "They're on their way home. At least I hoped they'd manage to get to the car safely." Bryson nodded.
"We need to shift and search for the kids from the air."
My father's words hit me like a battering ram. I was warned not to use magic. He snapped his head back.
"By who?"
Keeping my voice low, I said, "Liam. He said, no matter what happens, no magic."
"So help me God, if they had something to do with this."
I pulled him to the side of the gathering space. "We'll worry about that after we find the kids. Go in the woods and shift. Just make sure no one sees you. I'll join you in the air as soon as I can."
"Are you sure that's a good idea?"
I couldn't believe he'd asked. What choice do we have? They've forced our hands.
"Be careful."
He pressed a kiss to my brow.
"Tessa, Bryson, I need to speak with you."
Buck stormed over to us.
"What happened here today will not stand, until the elders decide what to do with the Fae. Whatever you're about to say, don't."
Bryson held his hand up to the older man. Buck's eyes widened. I'd smarted off to him more times than I could count, but Bryson had always spoken to him with respect. Bryson shoved Jolene's bloody purse into Buck's hands.
"Our daughter and Tessa's 7-year-old cousin are missing. I found this in a pool of blood beside the river."
"What did you think would happen with those creatures here?"
He spat on the ground and tossed the purse at me.
"I'll send out search parties, but once those kids are found, you and yours will not set foot on these lands again."
Bryson dipped his chin in acceptance or gratitude or what the hell ever. I was having no part of it. "This isn't our fault. You're the one that said you have enough magic users here to stop trouble, but you damn sure started it with denying Quinn." Bryson rested his hand on my shoulder.
"There will be time for talk once the kids are safe."
Buck gave us a once-over, sneered, and walked away. I motioned to the retreating elder. One day he loves us, the next he treats us like something he stepped in. We've come every time he's needed us and never asked a thing in return. Bryson turned me to face him.
"Forget about Buck. Round up any of the Fae who are still here and ask them to help us find Jojo and TJ. I'll meet you in the air."
I watched him disappear into the woods before heading back into what remained of the crowd. At first glance, it appeared the Fae had all gone. I told myself that they'd left with the Queen, that they didn't know children were missing. But I sucked at lying, even to myself. Lost in thought, I jogged down the path leading to the river. With any luck, Buck was still pissing vinegar about the Fae and hadn't gotten around to sending out the search parties. If I hurried, I could stash my clothes and shift before anyone else made it to the water. As luck would have it, I found a Fae straggler standing on the bank staring off into space. "I'm surprised you're still here." Killian glanced back at me and sighed.
"I'm in no hurry to return to the palace."
Part of me wanted to lay into him for not telling me about Liam and Quiva, but I had more important things to do. "Jolene and my little cousin are missing. Will you help me find them?"
"They probably wandered off during the excitement back there. I'm sure they're fine."
He shoved his hands into his pockets. His lack of concern ticked me off, but it made sense if he had something to do with their disappearance. "Did you do this? Are you the one behind all these freaking tests?" He held up his hands.
"No, I didn't do this. I swear on our mother's spirit."
"Did the Queen? Who's doing this to me and my family?"
"I'm sorry."
Killian raked his hands over his head.
"I can't say. I'm so sorry."
I swallowed my anger and my pride. "Please, Killian, I'm begging you." The tears I'd held back since learning the kids were missing finally fell. "Bryson found Jojo's bloody purse near here, and there was a murder not far away. Please, I have to find them." He hung his head.
"We aren't permitted to use magic around humans."
"That's crap! Every Fae here was loaded with it." Nodding, he said,
"Because we were trying to prevent a scene. How did you and your men not realize the humans in the crowd wished you ill?"
"You could sense their intentions?" The words fell out before I'd thought the better of them. Once again, he'd proven just how ignorant we were when it came to our magic. But he'd missed something important. "If that's true, how did you miss the fact that Buck and half the elders were ready to toss you and the other Fae out of here?" He gave me a less than patient smile.
"Tessa, this is ridiculous. What you don't know is going to get you killed. It's time that you come to Tiernan Oak."
I found myself at a loss for words and a loss for time. I needed to find the kids, not discuss my feelings as a freaking fairy. I'm not going anywhere. My family is here. All fae are welcome in Tiernan Oak, and there's the rub. I shook my head. Fae are welcome, but humans are not. Killian turned away. Family isn't just about sharing DNA. It's about love and history and acceptance, no matter what. That may not mean much to you, Killian or Rourke, but it's everything to me. I ducked behind a live oak and stripped. You don't understand. He followed me, but turned when he caught sight of my bare skin. Everything I've done is for you and your family. If that were true, you'd help me find the kids. Moving as quickly as possible, I hid my clothes. We have a saying around here. Talk's cheap. He threw his head back and groaned. Things aren't always as they seem. I'd heard the same thing from Gavin, or from Charlie through Gavin, but I was sick to death of the games. How are two missing kids in a bloody purse not as they seem? Unless they aren't really in danger? Is that it? Do you know where they are? I can't say for certain. I wanted to scream or throw something or beat the truth out of my brother. Then tell me what you know or what you think or anything that can help me. He pinched the bridge of his nose. I can't, damn it. Right. Just like you couldn't tell me our father married the queen who was supposedly holding him hostage? I couldn't tell you what I didn't know and will never understand. Disgust thickened his voice. I almost felt sorry for him, but not quite. The only thing I'm worried about right now is finding Jojo and TJ. I'll take whatever punishment is coming to me, but dead or alive, I'm bringing them home where they belong. Storm clouds roiled overhead, and fat raindrops fell around us. Weird weather wasn't unusual in Florida, but that was the second time a storm had popped up out of nowhere when Killian was around. Knock it off with the rain. I waved at the sky. The clouds will make it harder to find the kids. Killian muttered under his breath and the rain slowed. I'm providing cover. Remember what I told you about exposing your magic to humans? I remembered all right. It was hard to forget when my newfound father had pretty much told me the same thing. I understood the reasoning behind the rule, but reasoning went out the window when children's lives were on the line. Voices carried from farther up the path. I had to make a decision. Trust him and search on foot, or use my magic and break Fey law. I chose the latter. Dropping my shields, I held my arms wide and let the firebird consume me. One moment I stood on two legs, the next I soared through the afternoon sky in a ball of fire. My vision sharpened until I could count the whiskers on a mouse from 10 stories up. Spectrums of colors I couldn't name danced before my eyes. Searching for any signs of the children, I flew over the area in ever-widening circles. Heat signatures of the people and creatures below drew my attention. Men shouted and pointed, but they weren't the ones I sought. The firebird mistook my heightened emotions for danger and wanted to roast them alive. My control faltered, and for a terrifying moment I worried the predator in me would take over. The only thing that stopped her and saved the men below was the unquestionable knowledge that Bryson was close. Though he was a good half-mile away, his magic drew me to him like a homing beacon. The firebird's natural instinct was to go to her mate. Her split focus allowed me to maintain control. I doubled back and flew over the muddy riverbank where I'd left Killian. A blast of magic sent shockwaves into the sky. The air currents around me shifted with such violence I had no hope of escape. As if caught in a rogue wave, I tumbled end over end through the air, not daring to stretch my wings for fear they'd snap. A millisecond later, a creature the size of an elephant blew past me and disappeared into the clouds. One word lodged in my brain: dragon. Chapter 36. Don't panic. Dragons are giant lizards. Birds eat lizards. What the heck am I thinking? To that monster, I'm fun-sized. I caught movement from the corner of my eye, but the dragon's white and silver scales blended with the clouds. Normally, the firebird could see heat signatures, but the creature had none. Then again, reptiles were cold-blooded. A shadow passed above me. Fear made it difficult to breathe, let alone fly. The dragon snaked its long neck down until its head was close enough to strike. There were plenty of horrible ways to die, but being a dragon's hors d'oeuvre had to be the worst. I prayed the damned thing would swallow me whole. Using my only defense, I blazed brighter, the heat turning my flames from oranges and yellows to white. If I was going to be a snack, I intended to cause some serious heartburn. The creature jerked its head back, and a familiar magic caressed me. The icy power reminded me of snowflakes, cold and delicate. Killian? I met the dragon's emerald green eyes, and my heart lurched. Not only could my brother shift into a freaking dragon, but he'd broken Fey law. For me. Had I been in human form, I would have hugged him, or cried, or both. Instead, I flew in spirals around his long neck and let out a short series of chirps. Someone screamed, high and shrill below. I recognized the pitch immediately. Jolene's spider shriek. Cursing my weird bird hearing, I scanned the ground, but it was no use. I couldn't make out lower tones enough to get a sense of where the sound was coming from. Killian nodded to the north, away from the tribal house and river. Message received. I dove below the clouds and headed in the direction he'd indicated. Jolene and TJ were down there somewhere. Bryson's magic brushed against mine. He was close. Maybe too close. I didn't know what he'd do if he saw the dragon after hearing the girl scream, but I doubted it'd be good. As if Killian had read my mind, he veered into a heavy cloud bank. Of course, just when I thought we were on the same wavelength, my brother let out a roar that shook the trees below. The great hawk cut through the sky like a bullet, far faster than a natural bird could fly. I had no way to warn him about Killian's spirit animal other than to calm my nerves and project a sense of peace. Easier said than done, given my situation. Killian dove toward the ground. Bryson screeched, tucked his wings, and barrel rolled after him. I followed, praying they'd recognize each other before one or the other did something I'd regret. A flash of light blinded me. At first, I thought I was under attack. It wasn't until another, smaller beam hit my eyes that I realized where the light was coming from. Mirrors. Dozens of tiny mirrors. Once again, fear robbed me of my innate ability to fly. Free falling, I struggled to regain control of my magic. Mere inches from the tops of the trees, I spread my wings in hopes of catching an updraft. Another roar filled the air, and a gust of frigid wind sent me soaring. The sensation was a bit like being fired out of an ice cannon, exhilarating with a heavy dose of oh shit. Below me, Killian and Bryson shouted, but I couldn't tell if they were going at each other or something else. The only thing I knew for certain was that I needed to get down there. Zigzagging my way through the branches, I tried to make sense of the scene. Killian looked on as Bryson crouched inside a charred circle. From my position, I couldn't tell what or who he was looking at. The moment my feet hit the ground, I shifted to human form and ran to them. Bryson stood with TJ's little, lifeless body in his arms. He turned, met my gaze, and pressed his lips into a tight line. "Oh, God, no!" I ran toward him, but Killian grabbed my arm before I reached my husband and the boy. Jerking me back, he turned me to face him.
"The child is bespelled, but alive. We should leave him and find the girl."
"Are you crazy? We can't leave him out here." I jerked free and hurried to Bryson. "Is he okay? Can we break the spell?"
I believe so, but we shouldn't do it here. I'll take him back to the tribal house.
His pained expression stole my breath.
You two keep searching for Jojo.
I brushed my fingertips over TJ's damp forehead and nodded.
"You'll need clothing."
Killian's magic crackled around us. I looked at him for the first time since shifting and was surprised to find him wearing the suit he'd worn earlier. "How did you—" The weight of fabric on my skin stunned me speechless. I had no clue how Killian had conjured jeans, t-shirts, and boots out of thin air, but I wasn't about to complain. I motioned between us. "You can just make stuff appear?"
"Only if it already exists and I am familiar with it."
Killian shrugged as if it were no big deal.
"It's much like choosing which mythical beast to shift into. Imagine it in your mind's eye and call it into reality."
I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. I'd never even considered I could shift into anything other than the Firebird. "You had a choice? You could have picked something small and nondescript like a wasp, but you chose to turn into a freaking dragon the size of a rhino?"
What Tessa means is thank you.
Bryson's shoulders sagged, but I doubted it had anything to do with my outburst. Once again, my brother had proven we were outclassed in the magic department. Killian's expression softened.
"Bryson, what I said about your magic. I was an ass. Your healing skills are extraordinary, and you're a better man than I can ever hope to be. I couldn't have asked for a better husband for my sister."
Thank you.
Bryson stood a little straighter and headed for the path with TJ in his arms. I'd lost count of the number of times Killian had shocked me in the previous couple of hours. That he'd given Bryson a compliment when he'd needed it most impressed me even more than his ability to turn into a dragon. "Thank you for that, and for helping me. But you broke the fairy golden rule."
"Terrorizing children is a new low, even for the Fae,"
Killian muttered under his breath. I reached for one of the mirrors hanging above the charred circle.
"Wait."
Killian grabbed my wrist.
"We don't have time for that. We need to find Jolene."
"You're hurting me." I jerked my arm back and stared down at the red fingerprints on my pale skin.
"That wasn't my intention."
He paced away, turned, and paced back.
"We need to talk before you read the mirrors."
"But you just said—" It dawned on me a few seconds too late that he likely didn't want me to see him in the visions. "You did this?"
"No, not this time."
Killian motioned to the area around us.
"Don't you recognize where you are? You've been here before. This is the first circle."
I glanced around and nodded. "Right. Where Wyatt disappeared. Did you hurt him?"
"No one was hurt. It was all manufactured."
Killian hung his head.
"Wyatt's been having the time of his life in Miami. When the time comes, he'll wake up in this forest with no memory of what happened to him."
I wanted to argue that losing weeks of your life and waking up not knowing what happened to you was harmful, but I had too many questions and a missing girl to worry about first. Where's Stone and the other victims?
"Stone was never involved in this. He left Darlene because he's a jealous fool."
Killian shook his head.
"After the first time and the mess with Wyatt, there were no victims. It was all Fae magic."
"You magicked a dead body?" I couldn't believe the lengths he'd gone to, and for what? Killian hung his head.
Yes, and for the record, I didn't think the children would see the remains.
Yeah, well, you should have thought about that before you decided to fake a murder so close to my house. While I was glad White was on a vacation and Stone was out there somewhere finding himself, the entire situation ticked me off. How is it you can tell me this now, but couldn't before?
I broke Fey law. Unlike you, I'm bound to the Queen. Or I was.
He held his arms out wide.
Now I'm an outlaw.
Why now? Why would you put yourself in this situation? I hated everything he'd done to me and my family, but I still had hope that somewhere under the piles and piles of crap was the brother I'd always wanted.
Something you said about family rang true for me.
He cleared the emotion from his throat and scrubbed his hands over his face.
Enough talk. We have to hurry. We have to find the girl before the Queen's men find me.
Questions buzzed around in my head like bees in a hive, but I forced myself to focus. Where do we start? He motioned to the circle where we'd found TJ.
Jolene should have been here, under the same spell as the boy.
Jolene's been resistant to magic lately. As much as I wanted to let my guard down and trust him, I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You said you didn't take her, but how do you know so much about this?
I was ordered to take her from this circle to Tiernan Oak.
Killian knelt and pressed his palm to the ground.
Resistant how?
For starters, she woke from the healing spell on her own.
That would explain why she's not here, but not where she is now.
He pulled his hand back and furrowed his brow.
I don't sense any malevolent magic. Read the mirrors.
I will, but I couldn't help but wonder if he wanted to find JoJo because he cared, or because he intended to save his own hide by taking her to Tiernan Oak. Why were you ordered to take her in the first place?
After that summoning the other night. Do you really have to ask?
His tone grew more desperate.
We can talk about this later, but she's in serious danger. Either she's lost in this forest or someone else took her.
I'd never felt so unsure of what or who to believe. My indecision not only paralyzed me, but was costing time Jolene didn't have. How can I trust you? Killian winced, as if my doubt had physically hurt him.
I just gave up my life for you.
Spots danced before my eyes. Your life? You mean years of your life, right? He turned away.
Right. He's twisting the truth, hell girl.
Gavin's spirit shimmered beside me.
His level of disobedience is punishable by death.
No. I hurried to my brother. I'm not going to let them take you back to that wretched place. Do you hear me? I'm not going to allow it. A hint of a smile ghosted across his lips.
I have no intention of going, but the sooner you read the mirrors and we can get out of here, the better my chances of survival.
I gave Gavin a we need to talk look on my way to the first mirror. As with the others, images filled my mind on contact. Unlike the others, there were no creatures. No half-man, half-gators, or wolves, or big cats. Only the kids in the distance. TJ and JoJo seemed to be playing a game of tag. She'd touch him and run away. He'd give chase and touch her. At first, their path seemed random. They ran in circles around each other or zigzagged between the trees. But somehow, they moved closer and closer to the burned circle. I moved to the next mirror. The angles of the images was consistent with the angle of the mirror. At times, the picture would shift to the sky or twirl and twist as if caught in the breeze. These don't seem staged.
What do you mean, staged?
Killian asked. The images from the other scenes were fake. I touched the third mirror and caught an odd ripple to the left of the children. Focusing my magic, I replayed the vision several times. I couldn't be sure, but my instinct told me the shifting energy was a fae.
Fake? How?
His voice rose. Evidently, my brother didn't know everything about the situation. Hold that thought. I saw something. I jogged to the far side of the circle and tried another mirror. As with the first three, the images were natural. They came to me as if I were standing near the tree watching the kids play. And then I saw them. 2 ripples, one on either side of the kids. Each time JoJo ran close to the strange energy, she'd dart back in the other direction. I see shimmers near the kids. They look like ripples in water flowing over a stone. I moved to the next mirror.
They're fae guiding the kids to the circle. Keep watching. We need to know what happened after they fell asleep.
I touched the next mirror and focused on the moment the children reached the circle. TJ collapsed instantly. A few feet behind him, JoJo threw her head back and laughed like she thought he was still playing. She ran into the circle and froze. Eyes wide, she glanced around her, not at TJ. She lurched forward as if pushed or startled by a touch. A split second later, she fell unconscious. I continued to read the images, but nothing changed. The only movement came from the light breeze.
Hurry, someone's coming,
Killian whispered, but there was no mistaking the urgency in his voice. It's Bryson. I can sense his magic. I reached for another mirror. Killian made a comment about mates and love and our father's sham of a marriage. I tuned him out and concentrated on the mirror. Pulsing a hint of magic into the glass, I imagined pushing a fast-forward button. In the vision, Jolene bolted upright. She glanced down at herself, and her mouth fell open. I couldn't hear her, but it looked like she'd screamed. The girl jumped to her feet and swatted her arms and legs. She woke up and screamed because there were insects on her. Continuing to read the mirror, I watched in horror as Jolene tried to wake TJ. She cried out, glanced around, and lunged toward the forest. And the breeze caught the mirror. When it settled, she was gone. My heart lurched as if to chase her. I released the mirror and turned in a half circle, searching for any indication of the direction she'd gone. The pine trees all looked the same. No leaves to tear off, no branches to break. Nothing.
What did you see?
Killian asked. She ran. She woke up and ran, but I can't tell which direction. Unsure what to do, I split my attention between Killian and Bryson jogging toward us. Gavin whispered,
Read another mirror.
Right. I hurried to the mirrors closest to the trees, but Bryson stopped me. He took me by the shoulders.
The SUV is still in the parking lot, but there's no sign of...
No! I jerked away from him. No, please, I can't. Bryson pulled me into an embrace.
I'm sorry. They're all missing.
Chapter 37. Every doubt, insecurity, and fear about my ability to be a good mother roared to life. I hadn't wanted to work with kids or adopt Jolene or get pregnant with Quint, because deep down, I knew I'd fail them. And boy, was I right. But never, and I mean never, had I thought my inability to parent could cost them their lives. Killian rested his hand on my back.
I'll find Jolene, but I need you to keep reading the mirrors, and I'll find Aaron and Quinn and your mom.
Gavin's spirit hovered to my right, Bryson tightened his grip on me and said the one thing I needed to hear but wasn't ready to accept.
None of this is your fault.
Easing away from Bryson, I grabbed the mirror hard enough to crack the glass. Pain bloomed in my palm, but I didn't care. The vision hit me like a semi-truck on rocket fuel. Not only could I see Jolene waking from the spell, I could feel the insects crawling on her, her terror when TJ wouldn't wake. I could smell the sharp but sweet scent of pine mingled with the damp, musty smell of mud and old leaves. I could feel her heart pounding, her lungs expanding, the rattle of a scream escaping her mouth, and the wind on her face when she ran. Something slammed into my side and knocked me to the ground. I opened my eyes to find Killian looming over me.
Are you crazy?
Killian shouted.
Never use blood in a reading. You'll get lost in the vision.
Bryson shot him a hard look and eased me upright.
Are you okay?
Nodding, I pointed in the direction Jojo had gone. She went that way. He opened his mouth as if he had more to say, but shook his head and took off. A heartbeat later, a wave of magic crashed over us, followed by the whooshing air beneath massive wings. Bit by bit, my brain made the transition from the vision to reality. I stared at Bryson, trying to remember why I'd been surprised to see him. Where's TJ?
He's safe with Harris.
He brushed my hair from my face.
Are you sure you're okay?
I'm getting there. I turned to Gavin. Where have you been?
Stuck on the other side until you learned the truth. If I had slipped up and said any more, the entire bet would have been forfeit, and you would have been forced to go to Tin and Oak.
What bet?
Bryson swore under his breath.
Gavin frowned.
That you'd break Fey law.
All of this is because of a bet? Pushing myself to my feet, I shouted louder than I'd intended. Gavin's eyes bugged.
On that note, I'm going to find Aaron.
Not until you answer my questions. The spirit vanished. I can't believe this. I needed to punch someone, but Bryson was one of the few beings I didn't want to strangle.
When it comes to the Fae, nothing surprises me.
Voices carried from somewhere to my left. Whoever they were close. Bryson's magic washed over me like a warm bath.
We need to go.
He stood close enough that his breath tickled my cheek.
Now.
It's too late. We need to shift and get out of here. He pulled me to the far side of the oak tree. Pressing his lips to my ear, he whispered,
I'll distract them. Go, but don't light up.
The voices came closer still. I'm not leaving you. I took in my surroundings. Either I'd lost track of time during the blood reading, or he'd cast a spell to darken the area around us.
Damn it.
Bryson pressed my back against the rough bark and covered me with his body. For the life of me, I would never understand why he insisted on using himself as my not-so-human shield. I was the one who could die and rise as the Firebird. Last time I checked, Bryson wasn't bulletproof.
She called forth the Firebird at the first sign of trouble.
The female laughed, but it did little to hide the exasperation in her voice, a voice I recognized instantly. What the hell is Quiva doing here? Bryson set his index finger on my lips. I nodded, but everything in me wanted to jump out from behind the tree and go 10 rounds with the prissy queen and whoever the hell was with her. Better yet, burn her toes off one at a time until she told me where Quinn and Aaron were. Male laughter filled the air.
Don't nitpick. Tessa didn't use magic in front of the humans. She passed the test.
My heart thumped and came to a stop like a flat tire on the highway. I'd only spoken to him once, but I knew his voice. My dad was with the Queen. Worse still, he'd known about the tests.
You haven't won yet,
Quiver chided him.
You are her biggest fan, and yet you conceded the changeling should be. The changeling is an anomaly.
He went quiet for so long I worried he'd sensed us or Bryson's magic.
He's not part of the bet.
He's in on the bet? I'd wanted a dad my entire life. Just my luck. I finally had one, and he turned out to be a monster. And Killian? He obviously knew about it. So much for the whole Faye don't lie routine. My spinning thoughts left me feeling like I'd spent an hour on the teacup ride at Disney. Bryson tensed to the point I struggled to get air into my lungs.
True, but we may have to renegotiate after that stunt your son pulled.
The pouty tone in her voice made me want to puke. She probably thought it made her seem cute and innocent. Imprisoning a man for 100 years and forcing him to marry you isn't cute or innocent. I gasped, out loud. It's all a lie. Every last word of it. Bryson ground his teeth together so hard I worried they'd crack.
I'll have a talk with him.
Liam sighed. Talk? She scoffed.
There will be no talking involved. His fate is sealed.
Liam murmured,
Yes, my queen.
He agreed to Killian's execution?
Now, tell me who took the girl.
Quiver's delicate footsteps retreated. I felt as though I'd come out of my skin. What the heck were we doing hiding behind a freaking tree while two of the people responsible for traumatizing our kids, fake murdering innocent humans, and lying about everything except the color of the sky were feet away? We needed to confront them and demand they return our son and Aaron. Liam hummed a tune that took me back to lazy days with Charlie, Dottie sitting in the sun, and May tending to her roses. The haunting melody unlocked the box holding my grief and allowed it to consume me. Bryson relaxed and dropped his cheek to mine. Liam's cold magic raised goosebumps as it tickled across my skin. The tune he hummed changed to an old Celtic folk song. Mirrors clanked together, and I fought not to peek from behind the trees to see if he read them the same way I did. As if he'd read my mind. Bryson shook his head. Liam's humming changed to full-fledged singing.
The little red log like a spark of sunburst, fly. It's time you've risen. Earth is a prison full of my lonesome sighs. Out of thy hiding, silently gliding, go now, take to the skies.
Bryson took my hand and eased me away from the tree. My father sang the song again, louder and bolder, but this time the lyrics were as I remembered. He's telling us to go.
Liam, if you insist on singing while you work, pick a better song.
Quiver's laughter made my pulse race. Bryson led us a safe distance away from Liam and the Queen. Crouched behind a fallen log, we stared at one another. I didn't know what to say. I'd gone from hating my father to confusion to a guarded optimism in the span of a few minutes. Bryson pulled me into his arms.
We need a plan.
I don't know where to start. I slipped my arms around his waist and buried my face in his chest. When do you think Liam realized we were there?
I'm not sure. The spell I cast was meant to keep us in the shadows and muffle any sound we made.
Bryson dragged his hand down his face.
But my guess is Liam sensed your residual magic when he walked into the circle. If the Queen picked up on it, she might have thought it was his.
He was reading the mirrors. Now we know where I get it from. The tiny amber of hope in my belly growed brighter, but I doused it with distrust. Not that it matters. I don't want a father who uses me like a poker chip. He took my face in his hands.
Tessa, no matter what his part is in all of this, he's still your father. You have every right to know him. Just promise me you'll be careful.
I'm not sure I want to know a man who places bets on my abilities. I pulled away. I don't want to talk about this anymore. We need to find Aaron and—
They're still alive. We would have felt it if Aaron had—
That neither of us were capable of finishing a sentence worried me. We were too emotional to think straight, which could lead to mistakes that got people killed. A scream tore through the forest. A woman's scream. Chapter 38. I shot to my feet, but Bryson grabbed my hand and pulled me back down.
As far as we know, Quiva is the only woman out here.
He searched my eyes as if asking a question so horrible he couldn't verbalize it. I cupped his cheek and brushed my lips across his. We wouldn't be us if we didn't help, even if it is my evil stepmother. Bryson gave me a quick nod.
We're not running into this with guns blazing. We'll get close enough to see what's going on first.
Don't you mean wings blazing? I winked and eased out from behind the fallen log. Following me, Bryson mumbled,
And JoJo says I tell dad jokes.
Men shouting, followed by another gut-wrenching scream, came from the direction of the charred circle where we'd left Liam and Quiva. Careful to stay as concealed as possible, I picked up my pace. Cloyingly sweet fey magic, along with the coppery scent of blood, filled my nose and clung to the back of my throat. Bryson pushed past me and slipped behind the live oak where we'd hidden before. I moved beside him, crouched, and peeked around the tree. Quiva was on all fours, struggling to stand. Blood had soaked through her silk jacket and formed a puddle beneath her. 2 women and 3 men surrounded her. Their clothing marked them as medicine people, but their actions were the opposite. Her face twisted in agony. Quiva reached her hand out for help, or maybe to blast them with magic. The woman closest to the queen's head raised her hands and chanted a spell. Though I only caught every few words, there was no mistaking her intent. Without looking away, I whispered, "They're going to kill her."
I need you to focus on the queen. Don't take your eyes off of her.
Bryson slid his hand under my t-shirt and pressed his palm flat against my back. In the past, when he'd done this sort of thing, he pulled energy from me. This time, he pushed his power through my body. Quiva jolted, and a column of magic burst from her fingertips. The chanting woman collapsed, but so did Quiva. The other 4 magic users shouted and glanced at each other. Whatever Bryson had done seemed to have worked. They assumed the magic had come from the Fey Queen. The humans tightened their circle around the queen. Chanting in unison, they raised their hands toward the sky. Power rose in their palms. All they had to do was lower their arms and Quiva would be a goner.
Focus, Tessa,
Bryson whispered. My heart raced, and I struggled to keep my gaze on the queen. She's unconscious. How can she? Bryson pushed another torrent of power through me. Once again, Quiva's body jolted, only this time our collective energy burst from her torso in an arc. 2 of the humans fell to the ground. One of the remaining men shouted,
"It's not coming from her!"
Bryson whispered the same spell he'd used to conceal us from my father and the queen, but I doubted it would be strong enough to protect us from those actively searching for us. He pulled me to my feet and wrapped his big body around mine.
Don't move.
An icy breeze ruffled the hair on the top of my head, and familiar magic encased me and Bryson. I had no idea if Killian had returned or if he'd been there all along, but I was happy for the help. Shouts came from the direction of the tribal house, along with howls. From the sound of it, there were a half-dozen wolves headed in our direction. Shadows were fine and dandy to trick human eyes, but they wouldn't do squat to obscure our sense. Bryson tightened his grip on me, but otherwise remained silent. The human who'd first caught on that we were helping the Queen passed feet from us without as much as turning his head. A tugging sensation in my chest stole my breath. At first, I thought it was fear or a heart attack, but it came from outside my body. More confusing, it didn't feel like a spell or malevolent magic. I needed to alert Bryson, but I didn't dare move, let alone speak. The tugging grew stronger. A yearning, so deep and all-encompassing I could barely remain upright, filled me. I needed to go, to find the source of the what? The feeling? The person or object on the other end of the rope tied around my heart? My body moved before my brain caught up. Bryson's arms felt like a vice grip, hard and unyielding, and keeping me from doing what I knew in my soul I needed to do. To go. And then I heard it. The source of my need. Quinn's cries. Bryson whipped his head toward the sound, but otherwise remained still, holding me so tightly against the tree the bark cut into my skin. The baby's cries were high and shrill and devastating. These weren't hunger cries or even colic. These were the same as when Graham May had dropped him. He was terrified. Tears ran down my cheeks, and I thought my heart would explode if I couldn't hold him. More icy magic rained down on us, but did nothing to quell the war going on inside me.
I know you're there. Show yourselves.
Buck Oldham shouted from the clearing where Quiva had fallen. Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God. Droplets of water fell onto my face. Not water. Tears. Bryson's tears. His entire body shook as if he fought the same battle as me. The sound of animals circling sent my already racing heart into palpitations. Our only advantage was Buck and his men didn't know where we were. If we had any hope of saving Quinn, we had to do something before they found us, and they would find us.
We have your son. Can you not hear him?
Buck must have done something to Quinn because his cries became shriller.
We have the Dream Walker, too. Did you really think Holden didn't tell me what he did to him?
Bryson sucked in a breath.
Damn it.
I whispered against his chest, I can't do this. I can't hide while Quinn is in pain or scared.
Neither can I.
Bryson raised my chin, met my gaze, and whispered,
You've given me more than you will ever know.
Don't you dare say goodbye. I barely got the words out around the emotion clogging my throat. I didn't know where he was going with this, but I didn't like it.
It's never goodbye.
Bryson pressed a kiss against my temple.
I love you.
Unable to speak, I shook my head and clung tighter to him. It was an impossible choice, him or our son, but I had to believe that together we could escape. Without him, Quinn and I were both doomed. And Jolene and Aaron and all of the other people counting on us. Bryson released me so quickly I stumbled forward.
Wait for my signal.
He gave me one last longing look and shifted into a creature I had no name for. The great hawk was triple the size of a natural redtail, but this bird was massive. It took me a moment to realize his feathers weren't copper-colored. They were metal. Charlie's voice whispered inside my head.
Tla'nuwa.
I'd grown up with a Cherokee medicine man for a grandfather. I knew the legends. The Tla'nuwa were mythical birds of prey with impenetrable wings who killed the evil servant Uktena. Buck had called Bryson Tla'nuwa when we'd first met, and Bryson had used the name when we'd renounced our memberships in the tribe. Shouts rose up from the clearing, followed by the whoosh of wings and screams. I pressed my back against the tree and rubbed the middle of my chest where I felt Quinn. Where I felt Quinn's magic. He was calling for me. Gunshots and the high-pitched clink of bullets on metal sounded from overhead. The earth rumbled, and man and wolf alike cried out in agony. I couldn't stand it. I had to look, to see what was going on behind me, to make sure Quinn was okay. Moving slowly, I peeked from behind the tree. It took my brain a beat to make sense of what I was seeing. Pieces of men and wolves were strewn throughout the clearing, and Buck Oldham stood in the center of it all, holding Quinn by the back of his neck. The baby kicked and squirmed and screamed, but I couldn't hear him over the chaos. A blast of magic screeched through the sky like a firework, but hovered when it came closer to the Tla'nuwa. Bryson lifted his wing in flight, and the magic shot forward, striking him in the chest. He fell. Unable to watch, I curled in on myself and closed my eyes until the ground shook beneath my feet. Gasping for breath, I reached out through the mystical connection that bound me to my mates. Aaron's essence came through first, weak and far from here. Bryson's flashed once and blinked out, like a candle deprived of oxygen.
Show yourself, Firebird.
Buck laughed the laugh of a man who'd thought he'd won.
Your mates are dead. Will you bury your son too?
Bryson isn't dead. He can't be. He wouldn't leave us. An anger rose up inside me, but it died as quickly as it had come. Please, God, no. Charlie, where are you? Sheila? Mom? Bryson would be here if he were gone. Please, tell me he isn't gone. A black hole opened in my chest and threatened to consume me.
Tessa, my daughter,
Things are not always as they seem. My mother's voice came to me on the breeze. You are never alone, little flame. Not always as they seem. I'd heard it over and over since this nightmare had begun, but I still couldn't quite understand how it applied to my current situation. Was she telling me Bryson was alive? That wasn't my child dangling from a madman's grasp? Was I imagining her freaking voice? Buck's taunting pulled me back to reality.
You have until the count of 3 to show yourself, Tessa. I killed your mates. Do you think I'll hesitate to kill your son?
Tired of hiding like a coward, I stepped out into the open. Here I am. What do you want, Buck? Quinn went quiet at the sound of my voice. At least I hoped he'd stop crying because he knew I was close and not An evil smile stretched across Buck's face.
"Your life for the child's."
How do I know you won't hurt him anyway? I couldn't bring myself to look at the bodies littering the ground. Not when one of them was Bryson. My knees threatened to buckle at the thought, but I had to be the strong one now. I had to stand on my own without Charlie or Bryson or Aaron or Grandma.
"Bring the woman."
Buck nodded to someone to his left. Until that moment, I thought he was the only one left alive. How many others were hiding in the trees? Would he order one of them to kill me? Or would he do it himself? Magic trickled through the connection I shared with Bryson. He was alive, but I didn't dare look for him. Not when it could mean tipping Buck off. Is that his signal? One of the elders who'd been in the office that morning walked into the clearing dragging Darlene behind him. She turned her bruised and swollen face toward me and stumbled. I'd cycled through the stages of grief twice already, but this time I skipped straight to anger. There was no call for hurting an innocent baby and a defenseless middle-aged woman. You can have me after you let them go. Give the baby to his grandmother.
"Defy me, and you watch them both die."
He gave Quinn a little shake. Quinn's screams ripped my heart from my chest, but all I could do for him was to convince Buck to hand him to Darlene. Holding my hands out at my sides, I said, "I'll do what you want, once Quinn and Darlene are safe." Darlene fainted. So much for that idea.
"Do it."
Buck drew a blade from his belt and held it to Quinn's tummy. A trickle of blood stained his little ceremonial gown. Be it the blood, good old-fashioned anger, or the sudden flare of magic between mine and Bryson's connection, I lost control of the Firebird. Chapter 39. The Firebird burst to life, but she wasn't alone. The moment my feet left the ground, a second flaming bird barreled into me. But rather than going on the attack, it locked its talons with mine and rolled us end over end across the grassy clearing. When it slowed, it released me, nodded toward the sky, and took flight. Confused, I followed. The other Firebird flew toward the tree line and unleashed a column of flames. A half-dozen or so men made the wrong decision to run into the clearing, and the bird incinerated them one at a time. The cries of my young drew my attention. I circled above Buck and the baby. Movement below caught my eye along with the pull of my mate. He was there, injured, but alive and reaching out. Gunshots rang out and bullets whizzed by me. I tucked my wings, dove for Bryson, and covered him in flames. Not to burn, but to heal. The other Firebird called to me. Its magic felt so familiar and yet foreign. It bobbed its head toward Buck and Quinn, circled, and barreled toward them. I thought it intended to attack the man, but it turned away a few feet from Buck's head. More gunshots barked from below. The human part of me realized what was happening. The second Firebird was drawing the attention and the bullets away from me. Shouting orders, Buck dropped the knife, but held Quinn tighter to his chest. The other Firebird dove again, but this time it released a ball of flames about the size of an orange. The fireball grazed Buck's back, but missed the baby entirely. Screaming, Buck dropped to the ground and rolled to put out the fire. Seeing my chance, I dove for Quinn. I shifted 2 feet from the ground, darted to the child, and scooped him into my arms. Before I could run, Something hard and heavy smashed into the space between my shoulder blades. I rolled into the fall in hopes of protecting Quinn, landing half on my side and half on my back. I felt the dagger hit bone. Buck Oldham's weathered face filled my line of vision. He smiled as he leaned in and whispered,
I used this very blade to kill your mother. She was just as disobedient as you.
I didn't move, or blink, or take a breath. Buck had seen me go through this process once before. Heck, he and I had discussed it at length. He knew exactly what to expect. I'd die, but my spirit would remain in my body. I could see and hear, but I couldn't feel a thing. Seconds or minutes or hours would pass, but eventually I would rise as the Firebird. And when I did, he'd be waiting to kill me for keeps. Only this time, I wasn't dead.
Don't you worry about Quinn. I'm going to raise him as my own. He'll become what Bryson and Charlie were before you came along, loyal Nunahee slaves.
He pulled Quinn from my arms. I bolted upright, slapped a hand on each side of his face, and shoved the heat of the Firebird into his flesh. The acrid odor of burning meat threatened to gag me, but I refused to let go. Buck Oldham was the worst kind of evil. He was the sort that lured you in with guidance and friendship and trust. I'd be damned if I allowed him to take another loved one from me or anyone else. This is for my mom and Charlie and for hurting my baby. Buck screamed and dropped Quinn the short distance to the ground. It killed me to leave my child there, but we would never be safe as long as Buck Oldham lived. Determined to make him pay for every lie, every betrayal, every ounce of heartache he'd caused, I pulled more fire magic into my palms. Slender female hands reached for Quinn. No! I turned, ready to fry her, and met Queevy's gaze. Please, let me heal him. She nodded down to the baby.
It's okay, Tessa. It's over.
Bryson eased me away from Buck. I stared at the charred bits of flesh and yuck on my palms and gasped. In the heat of the moment, I'd wanted nothing more than to kill the man, but the thought I might have succeeded left me horrified. Is he? Did I? He shook his head.
No. Death is too good for him.
Queeva spoke while smiling at the baby.
He will spend the rest of his days in my dungeon.
I glanced from her to Bryson and back. I thought the humans killed you. The Queen breathed out a sigh, and her magic swirled around us. But it wasn't her magic. It was my fire and Bryson's warmth intermingled with her cool, sweet essence.
I believe I was close to the end, but you two saved my life. I owe you many favors.
The brush of silky fabric on my skin made my breath catch. I glanced down to find myself not only clothed in a flowy dress, but clean. Bryson said,
Thank you.
Hell, girl, sorry to interrupt.
Gavin's spirit hovered a few feet away. He motioned to the Queen.
Can she hear me?
I glanced at Queeva and made a how-the-heck-do-I-know face at the ghost. After all, he was the one who told me only one living fae had all 5 types of magic. Surely Gavin had someone more informed to ask than me. He went quiet for a sec, then shook his head.
She can't. Okay, here's the deal. In theory, Aaron found Jojo.
Aaron's alive! The words fell out before I could stop them. To cover my tracks, I forced a smile. I mean, I can sense him. He's alive. Bryson gave me an odd look, but seemed to catch on.
Do you know where he is?
He's safe. Some of Bryson's friends have him hidden in a room at the tribal house.
Gavin glanced behind me at something and looked away just as quickly.
Be careful not to let on about me. You're not out of trouble just yet.
He's safe. I stared, hoping against hope he knew what was going on.
Aaron has a good idea where Jojo is, but Killian needs your help,
Gavin said. Killian was still searching for Jolene? How was that possible? He'd shown up as a decoy firebird, but I hadn't seen him since Bryson had peeled my hands off of Buck's face. Then again, it made sense Killian would leave since Kriva was there. The spirit sighed.
Something's wrong. I can feel Jojo calling for me, but Killian and I can't find her. She's scared, but I don't think she's hurt.
My poor battered heart couldn't take much more, and my bruised brain struggled to come up with a way to communicate with the spirit that wouldn't tip the queen off. I have to go to him.
We have no idea what we'll face there. We should both go.
Bryson stood and helped me to my feet. I'll summon reinforcements and someone to clean up this mess. Still holding Quinn, Kriva moved to my side. But surely you don't intend to take this sweet child with you while you search. I had no intention of leaving our son with the woman responsible for the mess we found ourselves in, but I couldn't kick her fey butt back to Tiernan Oak. I had to handle the situation carefully, and diplomacy was never my strong point. Tessa Marie! Darlene stumbled toward us like a drunk at closing time. My God, what happened here? Darlene tripped over a detached leg and fainted again.
Go. I'll get her and Quinn to safety.
Bryson's long-legged strides ate up the distance between him and my mother.
Hurry, hell girl.
Gavin paced a few inches from the ground.
Jojo's becoming more desperate.
I turned back to the queen. I'd like to call in one of the favors you owe me. She raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Promise me. Under no circumstances will you take Quinn to Tiernan Oak without my express permission. I'd tried to cover my bases and leave no loopholes, but just to be sure, I added, mine or one of his father's permission. I mean Bryson or Aaron. Grandfathers don't count. Quiva winced and turned her head.
I swear it.
I didn't have time to sort out her reaction. Part of me wondered if I'd hurt her feelings, but I doubted that was possible.
Find our girl, Tessa.
Bryson gave me a heartbreaking smile. I loved that he trusted me to find Jojo, but the thought of disappointing him scared the dickens out of me. Rather than responding, I shifted into the Firebird and followed Gavin's spirit away from the clearing. Chapter 40. I found Killian beside a dilapidated hunting cabin near the western bend of the river. My normally calm, cool, and collected brother looked almost as ramshackle as the building. Mud had dried on his clothes, and small scratches dotted his face and forearms. I wasn't all that surprised he looked like hell. He'd put up quite a fight against Buck's men. Are you okay?
I'm fine.
He motioned to the area around him.
I'm not so sure about Jolene.
Adrenaline flooded my bloodstream. Gavin said she's scared but not hurt.
That doesn't mean she's alone. Someone could have taken her.
He raked his hands through his hair. My knees threatened to buckle. Oh, God. I didn't think... Do you sense her presence? Sense her? You mean her magic? I'd never thought to search for her power. Why would I? The only way it would work is if she happened to be communing with ghosts. He gave me an odd look. It's more a matter of... His brow furrowed, as if he struggled to put it in terms I would understand. Think of it as sniffing out her scent. Only instead of using your nose, you'll use your magic. That makes sense. It didn't make a lick of sense. But you're obviously stronger than I am. Can't you do it? Gavin piped in.
Hell, girl, we've been searching for her for hours. Don't you think one of us would have done it by now if we could?
Hours? I glanced between the spirit and Killian. I haven't been around her enough to recognize her essence. Killian glanced around the dense forest. I'm just as likely to lead us to another fae. There are other fae out here? You think one of them took her, don't you? My voice bordered on hysteria. The only fae I could imagine being this far out in the forest were the ones looking for Killian. I thought back to the promise Quiva made and pressed my hand to my chest. I'd made her swear she wouldn't take Quinn to Tiernan Oak, but that wouldn't stop her from ordering someone else to do it. I'll try. I walked a few yards from them and closed my eyes. Planting my feet, I imagined my power as vines spreading and covering the forest floor. I felt the gentle slope of the land near the river, fallen logs, the root systems of countless trees. Rather than calling out with my voice, I spoke through my spirit. Jojo, are you there? I felt her essence, small and shivering. Forcing more energy through the web, I wrapped my magic around her in hopes she'd feel it and recognize me. Mommy! Jolene's spirit vanished. Refusing to think of what her disappearance could mean, I bolted in her direction. Jojo! Branches bit into my arms and face, but I couldn't stop. Not until I found her. Jojo! Where are you? Here! Please find me! Please! She sobbed loud enough for me to follow the sounds with my ears instead of my magic. Or so I thought. It seemed as if I were running in circles. Jojo, where are you?
No, this way.
Gavin flew in a different direction, only to stop and cry out in frustration.
I swear I heard her.
Killian caught up with me and grabbed my shoulders. Bending to meet my gaze, he said,
This is what I've encountered all day. I hear her, but can never find her.
I don't understand. I felt her spirit. His eyes widened.
Her spirit? You sensed her spirit?
But something was off. It seemed smaller than it should be, and then it vanished. But I could hear her calling me. I hoped I hadn't screwed up and admitted something I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'd face whatever came my way as long as my family was safe. Killian laughed and pulled me into an embrace. When he released me, he wore the same expression Bryson had when I'd left the clearing. Complete trust in my ability to find Jolene. If only I was so sure of myself. What? What did you figure out?
Tessa, listen to me. She's not hiding. I would have found her by now. I think someone put an obfuscation spell on her. Don't search for her this time. Search for the magic.
Obfuscation? Right. Whatever that is. Closing my eyes, I pushed my power out over the area. Rather than using it to find Jolene, I imagined searching for an unfamiliar magic. I found something. Something similar to mine, but bigger and bolder and more deadly. It's the same magic that was at the fake crime scenes. I glared at Killian. He'd all but admitted he'd set up the burned circles and mirrors. Holding up his hands, he took several steps back.
I didn't do this.
Ignoring him, I turned my attention back to the magic. This time when I brushed against it, it tugged my heart the same way Quinn's had earlier in the day. My feet moved before my brain caught up. This way. Focus on her. I'll make sure you are safe. Staying close, Killian worked like a fey machete to clear branches and underbrush from my path. The strange but familiar magic grew stronger, but faded as I passed an old oak tree. I circled back. My magic told me she was close, but the part of me that still thought of myself as human didn't believe anything it couldn't see. Jojo? Mommy! She wrapped her arms around my waist. TJ's hurt. He wouldn't wake up. He needs help. Fear overwhelmed me, leaving me breathless, shivering, and mute. I could feel her, but couldn't see her. Is she dead? Is this her spirit? Bryson has TJ. He's safe. My words came out in a gush. Killian stepped closer and patted the space in front of me where the girl, or the ghost, stood. His hand made contact and he blew out a breath. She's been bespelled. I glanced at him and wished I hadn't. His expression reminded me of Bryson's when Buck had denied Quinn. Shock mixed with rage. You know who did this? He opened his mouth, snapped it shut, and turned his head. Mommy! Jojo's voice cracked, but her body flickered into view for a split second. What's wrong with me? It's okay, Jojo. Uncle Killian is going to help you. Tell me what's wrong! She screamed loud enough to disturb the birds perched above us. We can't see you. I met Killian's gaze and silently pleaded for him to do something. He drew a ragged breath and glanced down to where the invisible girl stood. I'm going to help you, but I need you to not touch me or your mom, okay? No! Clinging to me, she flickered in and out of sight like the images in the damned mirrors. Why can't you see me? Am I dead? I screamed and screamed, but no one could hear me. Am I dead? Kneeling again, I pulled her close. Jojo, listen to me. You're very much alive. We're going to take the spell away, but I need you to calm down, sweetie. Can you do that for me? She sagged against me. Killian took a step back and dragged his hand over his face. Her fear is breaking the spell. This is exactly like something our father would do. It took me a heartbeat to catch on to what he'd said. Our dad? He refused to meet my gaze. I recognized his magic. Great. Whatever. I don't care who did this or why. Just how to break it. As far as I was concerned, I was way too old to need a daddy. I'd done just fine without one since birth. Killian motioned to the seemingly empty space in front of me. She stopped flickering since she's calmed down. I had an idea. A horrible, awful idea that would likely make Jolene hate me for the rest of her life. But if it worked, when it worked, I'd be able to see her sweet little glaring face. Kneeling to where I guessed was her eye level, I wrapped my arms around her. Killian and I are going to do something, but you can't move from this spot. I'm scared. She held tighter. I know, baby, but we're not going to leave you. I promise. It shattered me to lower my arms and take a step back. Don't move. Killian arched a brow. I leaned closer to him and lowered my voice. She has arachnophobia. His eyes widened, but he nodded. That could work. Jojo, no matter what, don't run away. My mind reeled with horrific what-ifs. What if she's invisible forever? What if she passes out or runs? What if we can't find her? Mom? Uncertainty thinned her voice. Killian waved his hand in her direction. Spiders, thousands of them, appeared out of thin air. They covered Jolene in a layer so thick they resembled a black, wiggling, fuzzy blanket wrapped around a girl. Chapter 41. As I'd predicted, Jolene hadn't stopped glaring since she'd broken the spell, or more specifically, since I'd ordered Killian to scar her for life. The dirty looks I could handle. Heck, I could even deal with her giving me the silent treatment. What I couldn't handle were the questions still zinging around in my skull. Killian and I trudged through the river and made our way up the path to the tribal house. Each step closer to the building sent my pulse up a notch. I glanced at Gavin. I don't know what the spirit saw in my expression, but he sighed.
Relax. It's safe. Buck and anyone who sided with him are either dead or on their way to a dungeon in Tiernan.
The ceremonial space came into view, and Killian stopped walking. He set Jojo on her feet and turned to me.
This is where I leave you.
The thought of never seeing him again left me breathless. I'd questions and doubts about him, but he was my brother. Despite his shortcomings and questionable behavior, he'd put his life on the line for me. Twice. I took his hand. Please don't go. The Queen owes you favors, too. Bryson and I may have saved her the first time, but if it wasn't for your Firebird, Buck would have won and we'd all be... Jojo stood between us. The last thing she needed was to hear the gory details of what had happened while she'd been lost. Killian furrowed his brow.
Tessa, I don't know what you're talking about. I do not have fire magic. I can't shift into the Firebird.
You weren't in the tree protecting me and Bryson? You didn't... My hands flew to my mouth. The magic was so like ours. It had to be our father. I'd assumed Killian had flown away after the fight to find Jojo, but I didn't remember seeing Liam anywhere on the battlefield. Had he fled the Queen?
That's possible. He has fire magic, as well as the other four.
Like my brother, I had mixed feelings about my dad, but knowing I'd inherited something from him made me smile. Killian stared off into the distance. When he turned back, he knelt in front of Jojo.
I'll see you again soon. I promise.
Jolene threw her arms around him. Please stay. I don't have any uncles. After everything the Queen has put us through, she owes me a brother. Emotions thinned my voice. Killian drew me into an embrace.
Dad was never her servant, Tessa. I'm sorry I bent the truth, but I was under her orders to get you to Tiernan Oak, no matter the cost.
He glanced down at Jojo.
I'm not proud of the things I did before I knew who you were, but please know, I had your best interests at heart.
I wanted to ask what he'd done, to tell him I could forgive anything, to beg him to stay. But I couldn't. Then let me return the favor. Go. I'd rather know you're free than keep you with me and risk your happiness.
Remember, little sister, names have power. I'm a whisper away.
He winked and vanished in a ball of light. Jolene sighed and took my hand. Everyone we love leaves us. Not everyone. I led her the rest of the way up the path. Aaron and Bryson sat on a bench near the ceremonial space. They turned, smiled, and met us halfway. The bruises on Aaron's face were awful, but I didn't notice a limp or other obvious injuries. Bryson swept Jojo into his arms. Holding her tight, he whispered,
There's my brave girl.
God, it's good to see you.
Aaron drew me into an embrace. I choked back a sob and buried my face in his neck. "Are you okay?"
I'm better now.
As if afraid to let me go, he held me close long after Bryson took Jolene into the tribal house.
Thank you for bringing her home. And for saving Quinn.
We never would have found her if not for your dream walking. I eased back enough to meet his gaze. "Is TJ here? Have you seen him? Is he okay?" Aaron chuckled.
Harris just brought him back. He's fine, but anxious to see you and JoJo.
"He's a rascal, but I'm glad he's ours. For now or forever." Now that things had settled and the adrenaline had worn off, I was exhausted. "Can we go home now?" A frown tugged the corners of his lips.
We need to speak to Quiva first, and
"Let's get it over with." I pulled away from him and took a few steps forward. Aaron stared as if he had something to say, but sighed and followed me. We joined Bryson and the Queen in a small conference room near Buck's office. The three of us on one side of the table, Quiva and a fae I didn't know on the other. It reminded me of a scene from a movie where the wealthy couple meets to discuss a divorce. In a way, that's exactly what I intended to do. Get her out of our lives. Quiva rested her forearms on the table and clasped her hands.
I cannot thank you enough for saving my life.
Bryson, Aaron, and I nodded, but otherwise remained silent.
I owe you an explanation for the events that brought us to this point.
She lowered her gaze and studied the table. I got the distinct impression she wasn't used to apologizing or answering for her actions, but I wanted her to do both. She drew a deep breath.
I sent several fae here to find the person responsible for the tears in the veil.
Aaron winced and leaned forward as if to speak. I put my hand on his thigh to stop him. Quiva gave us a knowing look.
It wasn't until they found the source of the tear that they discovered the website, and that you were Achilla and Liam's daughter.
I'd never get used to hearing myself referred to by my parents' names. Though I hadn't spent time with my mother while she was alive, her spirit had always been there for me. As for Liam, I hoped to speak to him, to hear his side of the story, and perhaps to get to know him. To speed things along, I asked, "Killian told me you ordered him to bring me to Tiernan Oak?"
Yes, but your father had other ideas.
Her expression turned wistful, as if the memory was bittersweet.
He believed in you even then. He bet me you could handle whatever I threw at you.
That my dad had thought so highly of me made my stomach flutter. Bryson stood and paced.
Including kidnapping our kids?
The fae beside Quiva tensed and pulled his magic to the surface, but she turned and shook her head at him.
They have every right to know the truth.
She met Bryson's gaze.
The girl, Jolene, cast a very dangerous spell. My intention today was to bring her to Tiernan Oak. I thought I could solve two problems at once. Educate the girl, and give you three the incentive to follow her.
I sat back to put some distance between us. What was the purpose of the invisibility spell Liam cast? Quiva's eyes widened before she shook her head.
I can't say why he chose to use an obscurification spell, but it was likely to keep her hidden until he could get her to safety. Your father has cheated since day one of this infernal bet. He went behind Killian and tampered with the visions in the mirrors.
Aaron ran his hand over the back of his neck.
No wonder the visions were so bizarre. He was trying to help. Yes. Well,
There have been many mistakes during this ordeal, and we have all paid dearly. Quiva stared at her hands. I apologize for that business with the wolf boy. Killian had no idea he was a shifter when he put the love spell on him. She motioned to Aaron.
Or you were a dreamwalker.
That was Killian? My voice rose in pitch and in volume. Bryson rested his hands on my shoulders, likely to keep me in the chair.
I assume he was acting under your orders?
Yes. I understand your anger. I should never have involved children. Your father was none too pleased with me when he found out. Quiva dipped her chin, but not before I noticed the tears in her eyes. I'd heard enough and wanted nothing more than to check in on Grandma at the hospital and go home. I think we're done here, but before we go, I'm going to cash in another of those favors you owe us. She raised a brow. Yes, a couple, actually. I hesitated long enough to get the wording right. I wish for you to give Killian a full pardon, and I wish for you to stop trying to force me, my men, and our children to go to Tiernan Oak. Quiva tapped her lips, glanced to the Fae beside her, and turned back to me. Done. With one minor change. Killian will remain in this realm as your servant. You will need a way to travel back and forth to see to your duties. Duties? I didn't like the sound of that any more than I liked her treating Killian like my personal Uber driver. Yes, I will not force you, but I hope you will agree to step into your father's shoes. As the first of the Leprechaun clan, you will be needed to attend Privy Council meetings, and I would like it very much if your children attended school in Tiernan Oak. You can commute, of course. I couldn't believe her. Sure, she was a queen, but the woman had some nerve. I'll agree to keeping Killian here as a member of my family. After what you've put us through, I don't want anything to do with Faye. Besides, Liam should be in charge of the leprechauns. Quiva glanced between Bryson and Aaron. She doesn't know he's gone. Gone? I wanted to believe her tears were because he'd left her, but my husband's grim expressions told me otherwise. Was this what Aaron had tried to tell me outside? Why Liam wasn't with Quiva after the fight? Why he wasn't at the table? Where is he? I stood and glanced between them. Bryson hugged me.
He sacrificed himself to save you and Quinn.
No, let me go. I pushed him away and scrambled back from the table. I need to see him. He hung his head, but motioned to the door. Bryson led me into a small room in the back of the building. Aaron and the Queen followed, but remained in the hall. Several small wooden chairs had been shoved against the walls, and a low table sat in the center of the space. It looked like a classroom, except for the flag-draped body resting on top of the table. As if in a trance, I stepped forward and ran my fingertips over the silky fabric. The rich blue, emerald green, and gold emblem was beautiful, but the name written across the bottom made my knees buckle. O'Rourke. Bryson held me until I could stand on my own. I turned and lifted the flag. My vision blurred. I'd only seen his face a couple of times, only spoken a handful of words, only embraced him once. But he'd given his life for me. How do I do it? I spoke to Bryson without taking my eyes off of my father's face. How do I give him a piece of my soul? Bryson moved closer and whispered,
This is a precious gift. It can only be given once. Are you certain this is what you want to do?
I caught the message beneath the message. If I did this, if I brought my father back from beyond the veil, I couldn't do it again for Grandma. While it broke my heart to admit it even to myself, Bryson had been right when he'd said Grandma had lived her life. May had told me the same thing in her own way. When it's my time to go, I'll go. You're not to try to stop me. I nodded. I'm sure. It seems only fair. He gave me life. I'd like to do the same for him. The sounds of Kiva weeping and Aaron consoling her echoed from the hall. Bryson rested his hand on my shoulder.
Reach past the self you project to the world, to the part of you that you hide from everyone.
Not understanding, I glanced at him. The darkness?
Your soul isn't dark, but it isn't all light either.
He seemed to struggle to find the words. I caressed his cheek. I think I understand. Then what do I do?
You must offer that part of yourself to his spirit. He will choose whether to accept the gift or not.
Bryson kissed my cheek.
I'll be in the hall if you need me.
Okay. I stared at my father's body, wondering what it would have been like if he'd raised me, for his strong arms to be my safe haven, for his jokes to make me cringe and laugh at the same time, for him to cry at my wedding and when holding my newborn children. The sad, lonely little girl inside me wept for all of the moments we'd never had with him, and for those that we never would. I closed my eyes and reached out to my father. Liam O'Rourke. I felt him turn. A heartbeat later, his spirit revealed itself to me. I could see bits of myself reflected in his face. The curve of my nose, the shape of my eyes, the slightly crooked way he smiled.
Tessa!
The little girl inside me hid, only to peek out a moment later. She reached a tentative hand out toward him and whispered, "Will you be my daddy?" Chapter 42. When I took to the sky as the Firebird, I was free. All I needed was an updraft and my mates to be happy. Nothing could touch me, not even death. But no matter how high I soared, the human part of me knew it was an illusion. Light and darkness, freedom and captivity, joy and heartache, love and loss. The previous few years had taught me they weren't two sides of the same coin. They were two children on a seesaw. The highs made the lows bearable, and the lows made the highs sweeter. But the best things of all happened while balanced in the middle. Case in point, holding my great-grandmother's hand during the last hours of her life. The only thing that made the agony bearable was the unquestionable knowledge that she knew I was there, that she knew I loved her, that despite my pain and grief, I would stay by her side until the end. I wanted to show her it was okay to let go, that we'd be okay, that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally become the woman she'd raised me to be. Bryson squeezed my shoulder.
How about some coffee?
Ignoring 3 mostly full cups of cold hospital muck, I turned my face up to his and nodded. That'd be great. Thank you.
I'll be right back.
He kissed my forehead and headed for the door. I leaned closer to the bed and rested my head on my arm. I'd intended to catch a cat nap, but when I woke, a 4th cup of coffee sat on the bedside table, and a blanket rested on my shoulders. Darlene knocked lightly and peeked inside. "Come on in." I rolled my head from side to side to relieve the tension. "I brought company." She smiled and opened the door wider. Stone stood in the hall, looking rather uncomfortable in a dark suit and tie. He had his hair pulled back in a ponytail and had shaved his goatee. I rushed to him. "My goodness, I hardly recognize you." He hugged me tight.
I finally decided to put my PhD to good use. You're looking at the newest professor of anthropology at the University of Maryland.
PhD? Is he serious? Wait, that's why he was in Maryland? Had he not been squeezing the daylights out of me, I would have fallen over. "You're moving?" "We'll talk about this later." Darlene eased into the chair I'd abandoned and took Grandma's hand. "How is she?" "The hospice nurse says it won't be long now." That I'd managed to get the words out without my voice cracking was a miracle that rivaled Stone's transformation. She nodded and turned her attention to May. I could only imagine what my great-grandmother would say if she opened her eyes and got a look at him. Either she'd tell him he looked spiffy, or she'd ask if he'd finally found Jesus. Thinking of what she would or wouldn't do, instead of her sitting up and being her usual mischievous self, made my throat tighten. That Darlene, Dr. Stone, and my baby brother were moving away didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I'd miss them, but I understood. Of course, those folks up in Maryland had no idea what they were in for. We'd made small talk or sat in silence for 15 minutes or so when Darlene stood, wiped her eyes, and shook her head. I'll be back later tonight. Tell her I was here if she wakes up. She knows, Mama, but I'll tell her." I hugged her and Stone goodbye and returned to my chair. Aaron came in sometime later. He kissed my cheek.
How are you holding up?
"I'm okay." He moved to the other side of the bed, kissed Grandma's brow, and sat in the hospital version of a recliner.
I saw Stone and Darlene in the lobby.
That must have been one heck of a walkabout. I laughed, despite the situation, or maybe because of it. She wouldn't want us moping around. She'd want laughter and family and good food. Grandma made a pained sound and shifted her leg an inch or two. Humming her favorite song, Some Enchanted Evening, I ran my fingers through her cotton puff hair until she settled. At some point over the previous 49 hours, we'd developed the little routine, or actually I'd borrowed it from her. She'd done the same for me when I was little and didn't feel well.
Would you like for me to bring the kids to say goodbye?
That he'd asked made me love him a little more. That his eyes misted and brow wrinkled with emotion nearly broke my heart. Sure, but let them know it's their choice. I glanced from the crayon drawings of our patchwork family TJ had sent to the lifelike sketches of Grandma's roses Jolene had drawn. Tell them she knows they love her.
Will do.
He kissed me quick and speed-walked from the room. Grandma opened her eyes and drew a shallow breath. I leaned close enough for her to see me without her glasses. "I'm here." "Have you been here all night?" She squeezed my hand. Her sudden burst of energy gave me hope that the doctors were wrong, but I knew better. The hospice nurses had warned me she would have lucid moments, but her organs were slowly shutting down. Nope. I went home, showered, ate dinner, and played with the kids. I pressed my lips to the back of my hand to hide my lie. I hadn't left her side since she'd been moved to hospice. Good. She glanced around. I can't see a doggone thing. I slid her glasses on. How's that? Better. She patted my face. I'd like to see Teague. All right. I pulled myself from my purse and fired off a text. The Fae hadn't left the human world since May had first been admitted to the hospital. Heck, he'd barely left the building. I think he's downstairs with Bryson. I don't know what he wants with an old lady like me. The uncertainty in her voice broke my heart. If I had to guess, I'd say he still loves you, but maybe you should ask him? I intend to. She tried to push herself upright, but the effort was too much for her. Let me help you. I fumbled for the button to lift the head of the bed. She patted her hair and went wide-eyed. Mirror and brush. It was my turn to bug my eyes. Little bursts of energy were one thing. Wanting to primp while on your deathbed was another. Pulling a compact and brush from my purse, I said, You should rest. There'll be time enough for that. She took the mirror and studied her reflection while I put her hair in some semblance of order. Teague came through the door and glanced from May to me and back before exhaling a relieved breath. May squeezed my hand, raised her chin, and blew my mind. I'm ready to go to the Summerlands, but I have some questions first. Teague jolted and lit up as if he had jumper cables hooked to his ears.
Ask away.
I stood and hitched my thumb toward the door. May shook her head and dropped her head back to the pillow. Stay. I all but collapsed back into my chair. Teague sat on the edge of her bed and sandwiched her hand in his. Can I come back? She struggled to catch her breath.
No, but Tessa and other Fae can visit us.
He glanced at the monitors behind her head and shot me an alarmed look. I had no idea what the numbers meant, nor did I need to. I could feel her spirit growing restless inside her body. The part of me that still believed I was human panicked. Her time had come. She was dying before my eyes. But somewhere deep inside me, a bright, burning ball of hope formed. Teague pressed her hand to his face and covered it with his. Rocking back and forth, he hummed some enchanted evening. I shot to my feet. Take her! What are you waiting for? Grandma gave me one last loving look.
That.
He swept her into his arms and vanished in a light so bright, so pure, I wondered if the Fae was truly an angel. Chapter 43. Sundays were still my favorite day of the week, but this one was bittersweet. I stood beside the hole in the ground as the gleaming white casket slowly descended. Although I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt Grandma was with the love of her life in a wonderful place, I felt as empty as the pretty box disappearing into the earth. Bryson slid his arm around my shoulders, and Aaron pressed a hand to the small of my back. Though they hadn't said a word, it was past time to go. The rest of the mourners had left the graveside service and were likely waiting on us to get home. I'm ready. I wasn't ready. Not by a long shot. Bryson tugged me to his side.
You'll see her in a few hours.
Not trusting my voice, I nodded.
It's not the same.
Aaron shoved his hands in his pockets.
I swear, every time I walk into her house, I expect to see her at the stove frying chicken.
Or watching soap operas in her easy chair. I rolled my lips in and willed myself not to cry. Again. Bryson sighed from deep in his soul.
I'm worried about Dottie. She's taking this hard.
Me too. I rested my head on his shoulder. But this isn't like when Charlie died. She's gone out with her friends once and has been spending a lot of time on her phone with her beau. We walked the rest of the way to the SUV in silence. I eyed the sleek black sports car parked behind us. Is that?
Looks like it.
Bryson chuckled.
I was wondering if he'd come.
That better not be stolen, Aaron said under his breath. Killian climbed out of the driver's seat and gave me a nervous smile. I thought we'd follow you to the house. I ran to him as fast as my heels would allow and threw my arms around his neck. Laughing through my tears, I said, I wasn't sure I'd see you today. Technically, Quiva hadn't agreed or disagreed with my stipulation that I'd treat Killian like any other member of my family and not like a servant. And I didn't plan to call and ask for clarification. I figured as long as he stayed out of trouble, he had every right to come and go as he pleased.
If it's okay with you, I thought we'd go to the Summerlands with you.
He eased away from me and nodded to someone in the car. I squinted, but couldn't see a darned thing through the tinted glass. The door opened, and my heart stopped. Liam pulled the dark glasses from his face and flashed me a smile that chased every last shadow away.
Hi, Tessa.
You're here? The ground tilted beneath my feet, but Killian caught me before I made a complete fool of myself. Liam closed the distance between us, but stopped a couple of feet away as if unsure of himself.
I'm sorry it took me so long to come to you. I needed to heal and to get the Fey equivalent of an annulment.
Killian rolled his eyes. It's okay. Bryson explained it could take time, and Grandma once told me the days weren't the same in Tiernan Oak. I babbled like an idiot, but I was so dang happy to see him I couldn't stop myself. Besides, knowing you were alive and carrying a piece of me with you was enough.
You gave me quite a gift.
My dad pulled me into a tight embrace.
If it's all right with you, I would very much like to see May again.
Absolutely. But we have a going-away party to go to first. Then, I've arranged a special surprise for the kids. Liam and Killian stared as if I'd told them I had to dance on a pole before we could leave. The party is for Grandma. It didn't feel right to... she's not really... It shouldn't be a sad day. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying anything else. Liam scratched the stubble on his jaw.
Do all of your 100 or so cousins know where May is? Dottie and our daughter are the only family who know the truth about May.
Bryson stepped in and saved me.
We're raising Tessa's 7-year-old cousin. He lost his mother a couple of months ago. We decided to call the wake a going-away party for his sake.
Killian looked as if he'd swallowed a bug.
Thank the stars you didn't tell Darlene.
Laughing, I said, she suspects something's up, but we're neither confirming nor denying May ran off with a handsome Fae.
Keep it that way.
Killian smirked.
That woman told me everything from your bra size to how to get under your skin.
And yet you kept coming back for more. I jabbed my finger into his side. One day you and I are going to sit down and have a long chat to set the record straight.
I hate to cut this short, but we need to get home.
Bryson rested his hand on the small of my back. Liam nodded.
I'd love to spend some time with my grandchildren.
Aaron motioned to the car.
Is this one legal?
Jangling the keys, Killian said,
Yep. Would you like to see my license and registration?
Aaron seemed to consider taking my brother up on his offer. I looped my arm with his and pulled him to the SUV. We drove the short distance to the house, me bouncing with excitement, and my men gently reminding me my family believed we were hosting a wake. The moment we turned onto the gravel road on the edge of our property, I knew something was wrong. I unbuckled and leaned between the two front seats. Why are there no cars out front? Aaron shrugged.
Did we forget to lower the wards? I took them down before the funeral.
Bryson parked between our house and Grandmay's little pink cottage. Killian pulled in behind us and cut the engine. Doesn't look like much of a party. My heart hammered against my ribcage. Where are the kids? And Darlene should be here. Dottie stepped onto the front porch with a little suitcase in her hand. There y'all are. I thought you'd gotten lost. Bryson, Aaron, and I stared slack-jawed. Liam glanced between us and Dottie. Is everything all right? That's what I'd like to know. I strode to my aunt. She wore her date outfit. Sensible brown walking shoes, her favorite green slacks, and a twin set that brought out the color in her cheeks. Only the suitcase seemed out of place. Dottie shifted her weight from one foot to the other and avoided my gaze. A first for her. She'd always been a straight shooter. I lowered my voice to give us a little privacy. Are you going on a trip? I'm going with you to the Summerlands. Her words came out in a rush. But you won't even take an airplane. Silly thing to say, but it was all my overloaded brain could manage. She set the suitcase beside her, took my hand, and pulled me farther away from the men. Tessa, now that May's gone, I'd like to be with Charlie again. Holy Moses, skiing down the mountain! I was not expecting that. Does Charlie know? I glanced around, half expecting my grandfather's spirit to pop out of the bushes. Of course he knows. It was always our plan. She gave me a sly smile. Why do you think I had lunch with my friends and spent so much time talking to Malcolm this week? I was saying goodbye. They all think I'm moving to North Carolina. No. I folded my arms. I'd already lost May. Sure, she wasn't dead, but she wasn't a short walk away either. And Darlene was moving, but that was probably a good thing. You can't leave me too. You're all the family I have left. She caressed my cheek. Sweetheart, turn around. I turned and took in the four men. All four loved me enough to give their lives for me and the kids. My heart swelled, along with a little bubble of shame. How could I ask her to stay when all she wanted was what I had twice over? Crying big, fat, soap opera tears, I hugged her tight. You're right, and I'm sorry. The men talked amongst themselves. Bryson must have drawn the short straw because he stepped away from the others and walked toward us.
Where is everyone?
Dottie let out an honest-to-goodness giggle. I sent them all home with the sympathy casseroles the ladies from church dropped off. Good riddance on both counts. I laughed along with her. Poor Bryson looked like he didn't know if he should call 911 and have us admitted or run away. I decided to put him out of his misery. Dottie's coming with us to the Summerlands.
Oh.
He nodded.
Oh.
He turned to me.
And you're okay?
More than okay. I squeezed Dottie's hand. But where are the kids? Quinn's sleeping in his crib, and Darlene is getting TJ and JoJo dressed for their big day. Dottie glanced back at the little pink house. I've packed up the sentimental stuff and set it aside for you. I had a feeling it'd be a while before I was ready to go inside, but I nodded. Thank you. Come with me. There's someone I'd like for you to meet. I looped my arm with hers and walked to the cars. Dottie gasped when Liam smiled. That has to be your dad. I always thought you looked like a Sheila, but you have his eyes. I didn't think I'd ever get tired of hearing that. I introduced the two, and for once, Dottie didn't freak out about meeting the Fae. Dottie's going with us to the Summerlands. She has a date with Charlie. Aaron's eyes about fell out of his skull.
You're leaving us too?
We'll talk about this later. She gave him a quick hug. Why don't we go inside while we wait for the limousine?
Limo?
Killian tilted his head. I planned a special day for the kids while we're away. I winked, took my father's hand, and walked inside my front door. I grew up here. Back then, this was Charlie and Dottie's house. TJ and JoJo came barreling into the room dressed in their best Sunday clothes. "Tessa!" TJ shouted and headed straight for me. He had a mason jar in his hand that looked suspiciously like Grandma's onion water. "Is this moonshine?" "Trust me, it's nothing you want to drink." I scooped him into my arms and breathed in his little boy smell, gummy bears and puppy. "Uncle Killian!" Jolene beelined for her new favorite person. "Guess what? We're going to a private screening of Vampire Suck the sequel at Micah Sterling's mansion." My brother nodded and smiled and nodded some more, but I would have bet my right arm he had no idea what she was talking about. The noise woke the baby. Jolene pulled something from her pocket, leaned closer, and half whispered, "Look, I'm not afraid of spiders anymore." TJ shrieked and wiggled out of my arms. In the process, he dropped the jar, and the stench of onion-covered roadkill filled the room. Aaron grabbed the boy, and Bryson headed for the kitchen and returned with a dish towel. Darlene rushed into the room with Quinn and came to a screeching halt. "My word! I didn't know you were bringing company." The noise level had ratcheted up so high, so fast. I was terrified to sneak a peek at my father for fear I'd see disappointment in his eyes. I couldn't imagine anything that the Fae Court had prepared him for my particular brand of chaos. Liam slung his arm around my shoulder, pulled me close, and kissed my cheek.
Thank you. I thought gifting me a piece of your soul was amazing. But this is perfect.
My mouth fell open. This circus?
This family.
His voice shook.
The love. It's what makes life worth living.
I glanced from the crying baby to Darlene doing her best to shush him, to the misbehaving kids, to Aaron pinching his nose, to Bryson and Killian laughing. I couldn't agree more. You've been listening to The Spirit Dancer, Book 5 of the Tessa Lamar novels, written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Holly Adams, a member of SAG-AFTRA. Text copyright 2021 by Wyndham House. Production copyright 2023 by Wyndham House. If you've enjoyed this audiobook, look for more of Kathryn's books at KathrynMHearst.com.